The root of the problem in the sustainability crisis is a loss of the sacred. Through conversations with scientists, theologians, scholars, thought leaders, and friends of the Spirituality and Sustainability Global Network, Make It Sacred explores the intersectionality of spirituality and sustainability and why this intersection is critical at our existential societal tipping point. Without spiritual grounding, we won't have a commitment or political will to create hope for sustainability. Co-creation always starts with a conversation. And what are we co-creating? A spiritually grounded passion that comes from a sacred understanding of the earth. Hi, my name is Maddie, and I'll be your host as we start these conversations together. Hi everyone! In this episode, I had the pleasure of speaking with Nicole. She is a somatic healer and coach and a CranioSacral Therapist in Frederick, Maryland. She loves diving into all things body. She was brought to her work as a healer through her own journey healing from chronic illness and trauma. She did this by tapping into her inner wisdom through her body, which guided her toward health, purpose, and love. As a coach, she specializes in working with women entrepreneurs, using somatic healing to regulate the nervous system, generate embodied self-trust, plug into that inner wisdom and intuition, and increase their capacity for being calm, confident, and receiving abundant money for offering their gifts to the world. Nicole loves nature, gardening, food, art, music, and writing. She believes in living co-creatively in community with divine and the earth. I will link Nicole's website and her Instagram in the show notes if you would like to connect with her or learn more about her work after listening to this episode, which I definitely think you will. This was such a pleasure to have this conversation. The reason that I wanted to have this conversation with Nicole on the podcast is that she really ties the link between how our relationship with our bodies really mirrors our relationship with the earth and with nature. I think in the fast-paced world, the modern world that we live in, it's harder for us to understand the cyclical, gentle ways of Mother Nature when we don't see our own bodies in that same light. So this is a really powerful conversation, and I thank you for being here and supporting us with your ears. But if you would like to support the podcast in other ways, you can look in the show notes where I will link our website where you can donate. If you enjoy listening to this show, you can also support us by subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts and leaving a rating and review. That just helps the show get out to more people so we can spread these important conversations. So why don't you start by kind of telling us where you come from, what your upbringing was like in your cultural background? I know that's kind of a lot of things, but
Yeah, of course. Well, first of all, just want to say that I'm super excited and grateful to be doing the podcast with you and just to sit down and get to know you over the next chunk of time. And so I grew up in the Poconos in Pennsylvania, and now I live in Maryland, so about 3 hours from where I grew up. And I spent a lot of time in nature. I was always outside exploring and finding things and collecting things and did a lot of traveling with my family. So I was very blessed to like visit national parks and do a lot outside. And on the sort of spiritual side of things, I grew up Catholic, and I know people have a lot of different experiences with growing up in a religious community or family. Mine was overall pretty positive, and I think that it helped me like as I've reflected on this question, thinking about this, I feel like I'm like, I was a really spiritual kid. I don't know that I like expressed it that much outwardly, but my inner experience was like really connected to things that were much bigger than me. And so it's been really beautiful to come full circle and re-embrace that as an adult. You know, that's what feels important to share about my childhood. And as I got older, I did go through some pretty challenging times with my family with divorce and things that really impacted me a lot, some like dysfunctional things, also a lot of love and a lot of good things too. But that did all kind of come up and play into my healing journey to eventually work through a lot of that earlier trauma. And when I was in college, I had arrived at school planning to become a veterinarian, and that had been my goal for a long time. But around my junior year, I had this really turning point epiphany. My intuition lit up and was just like, you can't do this. You can't go to vet school. It's not what you're supposed to do. And that had come from a few years of really starting to explore a lot of different things. I remember when I was in high school, I read the book Ishmael, which I don't know if you've heard that book. I'm sure a lot of listeners have. It was really, really a pivotal book for me as a kid. Essentially, it just helped to be putting this question into my mind of, is the way that people are living around me the only way for us to live? And I think that continued to build through college as I started getting into reading about environmental issues and cultural issues, and kind of having some pretty dark times of feeling not a lot of faith in the direction of our society, and feeling like that was a hard thing to move into as an adult. And so all of that tied into me finding more inspiration and rooting into like organic farming and environmentalism, and learning about indigenous cultures and how they lived. And so all of that sort of tied into this pivotal moment to change my life path. And I think that from there, even though at times it was really messy, I also do feel like I was starting to follow my inner wisdom and my intuition more from that point on. And so in my 20s, I spent a lot of years working in sustainability and permaculture. I I apprenticed with Michael Judd, who's a permaculturalist in Frederick, and did natural building, did edible and ecological landscaping, did my permaculture design certificate, and got married. And my ex-husband and I started a farm as well. So that kind of goes all the way up until 26 or so. And at 27 is when everything changed and I got really, really sick. Very suddenly, I had some things that were building up with my health over the years. Like when I was a teenager was really when I started noticing some different things with my health. And I think related to the stress and related to some of the trauma that was going on. And in college, I had more issues coming up all the way up to 27. But it wasn't really until that time when it was like a sudden crash, right? Where I was hospitalized a couple times and bedridden at times, a lot of neurological symptoms, really, really major depression. I essentially became like, it felt like I was a different person. It felt like I was born as a little baby and I had to relearn how to be a human. So it took a couple of years for me to start to put together some of the pieces of, oh wow, a lot of that was trauma. So I know I went from how did I grow up all the way to how did I end up there? But yeah, but it feels all interrelated.
So you do work as a somatic
Hmm.
healer and craniosacral therapist. And you
Hmm.
spoke about becoming really physically ill. How
Hmm.
did that kind of tie into the illness? Where did that play into your healing? Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, and so from that point onward of 27 on, and now I'm 33, almost 34, I just ended up being on this healing journey. Like I had a choice because I chose to want to be well, but I also the signals and everything was so loud in my body. It felt like, I needed to really be listening and figuring this out. So my journey kind of sounded something like figuring out I had Lyme disease, starting off with Lyme disease treatments, getting into some treatments with naturopathic doctors and Chinese medicine and learning about nutrition, realizing that what I ate really impacted my symptoms. It took about a year for me to start finding some things that were in like mind body medicine. So a lot of the thing is, and as you know, maybe with chronic illness, but especially people like with Lyme disease or chronic illness, it can feel really isolating because the Western medical community doesn't really acknowledge chronic Lyme and doesn't have a lot of guidance for helping people become well when they become chronically sick. Really, the medical system is better for acute illness, like, oh, a sudden accident and you're in the ER and they fix you up. But when it comes to deeper issues of our well-being, it's not really very supportive. So a lot of people end up on, I think, what is one of my mentors calls a divine healing journey. So it becomes that all of a sudden no one else really has the answers for you. And the only place that maybe might have the answers is somewhere inside of you. And it's your body, it's your inner wisdom. So it took over time me finding more pieces, following my intuition in a messy way, in a way I didn't really understand for a while, to get pieces of healing and pieces of understanding, to be led to, oh, like, I need to connect my mind and my body with what's going on. Like, oh, my illness isn't all just about the physical. It's not just I have Lyme disease and I need to get rid of this pathogen and then I'll heal. It's like, well, if I feel really depressed, why? What would make me happy? What is going on emotionally with me? And one of my turning points was when I realized that a lot of my illness had emotional roots. So to stop kind of going from the physical point as the anchor to more of my emotional health. And I started learning more about trauma. I started learning about more about body work and craniosacral therapy. And at that time also, which I don't need to get really in depth with it, but it helped me realize that I needed to make some big changes in my life. I wanted to find more of my purpose. Farming wasn't really working anymore for me, and my marriage wasn't working either. So it was sort of like everything at once. Everything
Yeah.
had to change at once. My home, where I lived, my relationship, my health, my career. And so I guess that is one of the reasons why I feel like it has that divine healing journey energy to it, because it's a lot, to kind of like release all these layers of our expectations of like what life is supposed to be like, and find this deeper space of trust and surrender, and also that courage and the whatever in us, the fire in us that like wants to get better and also wants to learn what's possible for ourselves. I started reimagining, what did I want my life to be like? If I was going to let go of all of this, what would my ideal life be? And having those images is still very powerful now. It's a lot of even what I do now is just imagining where I want to be and how that's going to feel. So as I was going on that journey, I really started believing I wanted to help other people heal. And so that's how I ended up where I am now, through a series of finding different mentors to work with. I worked for a while for a mental health type of program for kids. A lot of them had trauma, and that helped me learn a lot. And I started doing trainings in craniosacral therapy, other trainings, somatic experiencing, and just have been continuing to bring it all together.
Can you explain what craniosacral therapy and somatic experiencing are?
Sure thing. So I'll start with craniosacral therapy because when I started learning about it, it was really helpful for me to understand a lot of what I just said.
Okay.
It was founded by someone named John Upledger, who was an osteopathic doctor. And he did a lot of this in the 60s and 70s, developing this modality. And this modality is a touch modality that's used by all different kinds of licensed practitioners. And so I'm a licensed massage therapist. And so I do it under that license, but there's also like doctors who use it and physical therapists who use it. And basically I guess I'll say on this more kind of spiritual or energetic side of things, his idea is that the body has an inner physician. He calls it the inner physician. And I also like to call it the inner wisdom. he used that term as well. So the body has a force in it that knows how to heal. And so a lot of this is about providing subtle support and space for the body to make those changes that it knows how to do. And that's what I do as a craniosacral therapist, right? I'm with the person with light touch. My awareness is with their body. I can feel really subtle changes in their tissue with my hands. And we're helping old patterns, old traumas, old injuries to unwind in a way that the body knows how to do. And so that's honestly, it's in some ways very similar to the work that I do as a somatic coach. The difference being that as a coach, there's more coaching involved, right? There's this prolonged relationship, a container and goals, but it's still guided by that the body knows that there's an inner wisdom in the body, and that's what we're going to be checking in with in our sessions. And that's what's going to be guiding us. And so somatic experiencing is another modality that I definitely use a lot of, and it's really informed my work in both of those different practices that I do. And it was created by Peter Levine around the same period of time. And I actually think it's really cool because I know we might touch a little bit on shamanism at some point when we talk today. And Peter was a psychotherapist who also had done some learning and studying in shamanism. And so somatic experiencing, or SE, has some roots in shamanism, which is pretty cool. And so as a psychotherapist, he was working with a client who had essentially had a lot of trauma. And not a lot was known about trauma at that time and how it works in the physiology of our bodies. But she was describing something that had happened to her that was traumatic, and she got really shut down. Like he noticed that, she got quieter and maybe more still. And he had this vision of a tiger leaping out of the wall at him. And he just went with it. And he just said, "There's a tiger that's running at you, run." And something lit up in her, and she started like moving her legs and imagining and having some of that movement of running away from this tiger. And what happened was that in the moment when she experienced the traumatic event, something in her wanted to run, but something in her told her it's not safe to run, or maybe she was held back from running. That survival energy of running, she didn't get to do it then. She didn't have the time, she didn't have the space or the ability to do it at that time. So that energy has been in her body for years, right? Like never have been able to be expressed. But because it's there's more charge and activation and fear in the body, right? But when she had that opportunity in the present moment to enact, or even if it's imagining and acting the thing she didn't get to do, she was able to release some of that energy, and her nervous system was able to reorganize.
Wow.
That one moment, that one experience really changed a lot of her condition, the way she acted. So that was when he kind of knew he was really onto something. And he grew this modality out of that. And it's a really powerful modality that I'm really grateful that I get to integrate into my work.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I kind of want to give people some context here from what we were speaking about before when we were getting ready for this interview, because this podcast is about spirituality and sustainability, and we're talking a lot about physical healing. And one thing that you said when we were talking was that the healing of the planet starts with the healing of me. And also you told me a lot about just how important it is there's sort of a mirror between the natural world and Mother Nature and also our own bodies. So could you kind of paint that picture for us and tie those two together?
Yeah, I would love to do that. So that was a big part of my journey, and why I kind of told that, like, stretch, because I had this experience where I was like, I really want to make a difference in my life. The world is messed up. I want it to be better. And I started working to make it better. But it wasn't until I got really sick that I realized that I hadn't necessarily integrated all of that inside of me. I wasn't really doing the practices that would support my health. I wasn't necessarily, I even felt like I was kind of getting disconnected from the land as just being focused on making money and like trying to get the business to work as a farm. And like I had kind of forgotten even like my own connection and why, why was I doing it? And I wrote this song. Writing songs was a big part of my healing for a while. And there was this line in a song that I wrote that was just basically said that the healing of the planet starts with healing me. And it was a really big shift because I think we take so much on as people who care about the earth and who see people suffering, and we want to make a difference. And that's a lot of weight to bear. That's a lot to hold. And if we don't also go inside and clear out our conditioning and our wounding and our trauma and replace that with positive practices and nourishment and sacredness and fun and play and all the things that we need to be well, it's not really resonant with the future we want to create, right? If the way that we create a better world isn't just by like planting a lot of trees and like growing food, and because if we do those things without the embodiment and the spirituality and the cultural practices that keep us well as much as we want to keep the earth well, I don't even think we're really in harmony with the earth then, right? Because we need to really be listening to the land as much as we're listening to our bodies. And tying that in with this idea of our bodies are as sacred as the earth and that we need to honor both of them in that sacred way. I like to think about it as if we like zoomed in and did some like Miss Frizzle adventure and we got on a magic school bus inside of our bodies, we would feel like we were in some other amazing, crazy world with all of these like branching bronchi and alveoli into the lungs, branching out like trees, and these blood vessels flowing like rivers, and just like down to every little cell. Like there's like a little like brain in every single cell, and there's so much going on. We even have millions of microbes living in our bodies. Our bodies are an ecosystem. And in our culture, we treat our bodies like they're machines, and we treat the earth like it's a machine, or like it's not a living being or a living ecosystem that needs care and we need to have an intimate relationship with both. And as I started connecting more and more with my body, I think about it like this. I like to think how you could be laying out, if you imagine that you're laying on the earth and you're looking up at a starry night sky, and like how that feels, this expansive experience. And you could have just as expansive and sensation-filled experience by closing your eyes and laying down in bed and just being in your body, just feeling all of the sensations and your heart beating and emotions that come and go, thoughts that come and go, just our experience of being a human when we just close our eyes and just go inward is as vast of this beautiful beating rhythm of a landscape as the earth is. And what is it that like animates that? What is it that keeps our hearts beating and keeps the world spinning and all this stuff? Like there's something very divine that animates all of this. And if we forget about that, then we kind of just lose what's at the heart of it all, of being a human and being whatever our spiritual self is in this like earth vessel. Our bodies are made out of all the same things that the earth's made out of. We're just constantly exchanging particles all the time with our food and the air we breathe. And so it's just really a beautiful, beautiful thing. I think it's nice to sometimes like slow down and appreciate all of that.
Definitely. You speak about all of this so beautifully, and you can really tell as you've shared your story with us and saying how you had to integrate these things that you knew to be true in your life and what you did and how you acted. You can tell that you have, because you speak so beautifully about all of this. I feel very lucky to be able to talk to you about it. So what does that look like in your life? Once you realized this, once you kind of reached this breaking point of being really ill and realizing you weren't in the right place in a lot of places in your life. How did you start to change? What were those practices and ways of experiencing your body that allowed you to change?
Right. So many practices. Like I just took in so much information from so many places. But I think, meditation was such a big foundation of it. It's kind of the simplest way to just let people know, like, oh, this is how you get in touch with your body. It's by slowing down and by noticing what's happening inside. There's some different things to be mindful of with meditation, and all the meditation practices aren't necessarily trauma informed. So I'm just kind of noting that as I say meditation. I also kind of am just talking about like somatic practices.
Can I stop you for 1 second? Can you kind of define somatic?
Yeah, of course. So somatic just means body.
Okay.
Yeah. So the soma is the body.
Okay.
So somatic practices, somatic coaching, it's body based.
Okay.
So, but essentially, any of these practices, whether it's a sitting meditation, whether it's like walking meditation, whether it's journaling and kind of looking inwards, whether it's these really somatic practices of like maybe paying attention to our senses, just pausing and only focusing on what we hear, then only on what we see, only on what we smell, only on what we taste, only on what we feel. So we are just trying to awaken this interoceptive, which just means our perception of what's happening inside our body. We're trying to wake that up. And our proprioception, or like our sensing of where we are in space. We're trying to bring all of that back online for people especially people who have any kind of trauma or have been sick for a long time. Some of our survival strategies that our nervous systems do take us away from our bodies. So we tend to be more dissociated and less in our bodies, disembodied. And that's really common in our culture as well, just like the watching TV and being on phones and fast-paced living. If our lifestyle was slower and people were not on those things as much and they were more outside, I think people would naturally be more embodied. So all of the practices like that are really just around starting to get that connection back with my body and with my own inner wisdom, my own inner knowing, and my spiritual guidance, right? So meditation is a great way to start, for anyone who's listening, like following different types of somatic practitioners on Instagram and doing the practices that they share. And that would really be, my biggest piece of advice, just starting to reconnect with your body.
It's really interesting. I live with my grandparents who are many generations older than us. And kind of being in our generation, it's very normal for people to kind of constantly be connected to devices, be constantly stimulated, very like fast-paced hustle culture. Busy is normal for everyone. And you hear these things like meditation or try not to be on your phone for an hour during the day, and they seem so foreign and hard. But then if you're around people who are from an older generation who weren't raised with technology, that's how humans have always been.
Yeah.
And I hope that we don't evolve
Yeah.
to kind of have technology as part of our brains, because that doesn't sound very healthy. But really, what you're talking about is kind of returning to how we were created to be.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something that is foreign or kind of alien from our true nature,
Right.
which I find is so interesting.
Yeah, it's like the knowledge is in our DNA. It's like in our blood. It's ways that our ancestors have lived. It's ways that just humans have lived, humans still do live all over the world. There are lots of indigenous cultures, and there are people kind of on all different spectrums of, having traditions that are in touch with the land and in touch with their bodies, in touch with spirituality.
Even the Catholic Church, I always find this so interesting when I go to a Catholic mass. Their services are so physical. Like you're sitting and you're standing and you're doing, I mean, even the sign of the cross. There are so many parts of the liturgy. And I would assume that you would find this across many different world religions, where your body is very involved
Yeah.
in the actual experience of worship.
Yeah, I really like that you're bringing that up because like I mentioned, I felt like I was a really spiritual kid. And I think that like being in church and, praying like were things that did touch me and that I felt really like I was talking to God. Like I did feel like that because I was. And I like how yeah, just that idea of like all these physical aspects. And I think that there's a couple things that I kind of want to touch on here. One is just to note that people have different experiences with religion, right? So I have worked with some different people who have religious trauma because, unfortunately, within some of our kind of cultural norms and some religious norms, sometimes there's the kind of things that are embodied. And then also there is sort of this idea that the body is sinful or that even like connection with the earth, like the earthly things are sinful or like dirty, or they need to be dominated, they need to be controlled. That's where like temptation is. And especially like women's bodies. So there's sometimes for people, depending on their experience, there's a lot to heal and unwind there. And there's a lot from growing up with religion that has blocked them from being connected to and in their bodies. So I want to like make a nod to that. And also just that as we are like mentioning this, I want to, kind of also make a nod to like, as I've mentioned, different like indigenous practices and cultures that I think it's really interesting to look at what their traditions and practices are. Like what are, just like you would look at like the Catholic Church and you would say, well, what are some of their traditions and practices and values? What are those for different indigenous cultures? And what are they for our culture, right? There's a really great book called Braiding Sweetgrass. Robin Wall Kimmerer is the author. And as I was thinking about this, that book really came into my mind. There's a specific chapter where she talks about, and she is a Native American. And so she's bringing from her life experiences and her from ancestors' experiences as she writes this book. And one of the chapters is about gratitude practices that are practiced within their culture. And this is, I think, pretty common within Indigenous cultures. And it's like maybe an hour or more long that they spend like naming and practicing gratitude for the earth, for all earthly creatures, listing all the earthly creatures, for the water, for all the things the water does, for the medicines, for all the medicines, for the plants, for all the plants and everything they do, like on and on, just gratitude. And, she mentions that like maybe she had some students or something go with her and they were like, this is so long. But there's like kids there who are doing this practice. And how different would it be if those were some of the practices that like we grew up with? Or, and I think I did grow up with some good practices. Like my family always prayed before dinner and said, thank you for the food, right? Or like just praying every night before I went to sleep and thanking, being thankful for the things that I had or asking for people to be watched over, but it's just really interesting to look at that, like what, and I think that's kind of the next step. That's as we become embodied and we heal and we release like some of the conditioning of our culture that tells us that like our bodies are not divine, that the next step too is like, well, what do we want our lives to look like? What's the future we're trying to create? And what kind of practices and values do we need to have that take care of our inner world, take care of our bodies, our spirits, keep us rooted in uh, things that are going to be good for people and good for the earth?
Yeah, that's that gratitude practice. That is so beautiful. And I couldn't help but think as you were explaining that how a Native American, especially, before colonization, was spending, they could visibly see how their existence relied on the health of the planet. Whereas now we're not any less in need of the planet, but we're just far removed from it.
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps that could explain sort of the disembodiment too, is that we've grown up in such an industrialized kind of mechanistic society that we don't realize kind of how delicate our nature is, and not in a weak way, but how that we really are one and the same as nature. There's a man in our network Joe Holland, and he's written a lot. He's an amazing man. And he talks about in one of his books, and in conversations with him, I've talked about this a lot, as he defines technology as kind of hyper masculine, which sounds kind of weird, but if you think about it, this is kind of how I think about it. You could be so tired, and this happens to me often, and I want to lay down and take a nap, but kind of in that weak state of me being tired and kind of ready to drift into sleep, what I want to do is pick up my phone and like flip through Instagram or something. Whereas if you didn't have a phone and you were really tired, you would just go to sleep. But because technology, it doesn't have, there's no cycle. It's you charge it and it's good, and then it dies, and then you charge it and it's good. And so there's no like, we're not connected to those natural rhythms of, oh, the sun is down, now it's time to wind down and go to sleep. Or I need a break in the day, I'm going to disconnect. There's never a physical disconnection that's necessary because we're always connected to technology, which is not cyclical. It's constantly going and can constantly be pulling us. And I think about that analogy often as kind of a reminder of, okay, if I'm tired, that's a signal from my body telling me gently to rest so that it has enough energy to do what I need it to do. But I
Yeah,
think so many of us are so disconnected from that, even with like simple things like caffeine, you know,
right.
that I think it's really important to, when you think of your body and nature as one and the same, it gives you a much gentler view of yourself and the earth.
Right. And like that, there's lots of signals. There's signs and signals that nature gives us and our bodies give us if things are out of balance. Like we just need to listen to those,
Yeah,
tune with them. Yeah. And,
exactly.
been doing so much work around this concept of burnout, right?
Hmm.
And like the fast pace of our culture and the sense of like urgency. And part of that is, because I bring a lot of that into my current work with as a somatic coach. I specialize in working with women entrepreneurs, particularly women who are, heart-centered and have something, gifts they want to bring in, and they're doing their business because it comes from their soul, right? But maybe they're kind of still in survival mode. Their nervous systems are in this sort of like urgency, somewhere between fight, flight, and freeze and fawn. And they're just having a really hard time trusting themselves and feeling capable enough to move forward and feeling like they're worthy. And it's really interesting to look at how pretty much all of us have a wound of feeling unworthy because in our culture, worth is tied to so many different things, but it's never just given to us. It's never just like you're inherently worthy because you are here. And so we have to produce, we have to do, that's what makes me worthy, having a productive day. And we get disconnected from also joy and play. And so bringing those things in, it's a huge part of healing. Every time that we rest or slow down or play or bring play into the work that we're doing, we heal something. It's just kind of listening to that process. It's happening inside and like what's coming up for me when I try to rest. Oh, I can notice like something in me wants to rest and something in me doesn't want to rest.
Hmm.
We a lot of times that's one of the things I love with somatic experiencing. It helps us slow down enough to just notice all the different like kind of dialogue that's happening inside of our bodies. Oftentimes there's like multiple parts within ourselves, and something in us will want something, and something in us wants something else, and something in us wants something else. And just being able to be like the observer of all of that, just that alone, bringing the awareness to what's happening inside is like what brings so much healing.
Yeah, yeah. I'm thinking kind of back to my personal experience of kind of the same issue, starting to get ill when I was in college. And I
Mhm.
remember I've always been a really driven, disciplined person from a young age who kind of holds this belief that I think a lot of us have, that if we want something, we just have to work harder.
Mhm.
And if you're not getting there, it's because you're not working hard enough.
Mhm.
And it kind of all hit me at once when I started to get really ill when I was in college, and I was training for half marathons, and I was in all of these leadership positions and in a sorority and working, and I had my hands in so many pots, and a student. And I kind of realized, like, the first thing I realized when I started to get really sick was and it was interesting. I had that feeling before I get sick of, wait a second, I'm doing all these things, but every time I go and do one of these things, I have this feeling that I'm being kind of pulled away from what's really important to me. The friends that I really care about, the 4 people that I actually want to see that I'm living with. I'm going out and seeing all these dozens of other people. And then I got really sick. And the first decision I made was, okay, I'm cutting everything off that I don't absolutely need in my life. And so I quit everything except for my job and school. And I had like one of the best years of
Mm.
college ever, because even though I was sick, I was just spending time with the people that I loved. And I started to really grow creatively and start my creative career working as a photographer. And I always think back to that and how it's so interesting. And I have to remind myself this even now. I'll think, oh, I'm so tired and I want to be stronger. So I need to like work out more and do all these things. A couple weeks later, I'm so burnt out that you know what it's like having a chronic illness. You
Right.
can't, the answer is not to do more.
Right.
The answer is to do what you're doing. I mean, there are a million things I could say here, but a big answer is to let yourself do less and rest and give yourself grace, which I think is something that is so transcends every religion and spiritual practice, but really isn't a part of our culture.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll give another nod to a really amazing book that listeners might want to check out. It's called Rest is Resistance by Tricia
Okay.
Hersey. Man, it's been really helpful, really helpful. And as you're talking, I feel like I'm just hearing her as well. And I love the way that she describes the when we rest, we like enter our dream space.
Hmm.
And in our dream space, we heal, we connect, we know what's really important. Whatever like the mind chatter is goes away and things become a lot more clear and we have the like, room to imagine something else.
Yeah. And I think imagination is so important. That's really where we have to start before we go into any kind of work, or even when we're talking about healing the earth or sustainability. You have to imagine where you want to be before you can figure out how to get there. Because if you
Yeah.
don't start with that imagination, you're kind of directionless.
Yeah, we're very creative, co-creative beings.
Hmm.
We have to kind of claim that power that's within us, you know?
Yeah.
Like we are our own healers and we are the ones who are connected to everything else, connected to the divine, connected to each other. Like there's a lot of potential. I think a lot about, I think you can imagine anyone who's listening to this who like cares a lot about the earth and's like maybe made a living or dedicated a lot of their life to learning about it, wanting to heal the earth, that you think about a lot of potential solutions and you like want to have a way that you could imagine everything getting figured out. And I think that this journey over the last number of years and like the multiple so many times of like surrendering and trusting and listening to my intuition and the guidance that was coming through, even if it sounded hard or crazy, it's led to a lot of really amazing things in my life. And I just I like to imagine like what if everyone started listening to their inner wisdom and everyone started listening to that divine guidance that comes through our bodies when we do listen and slow down. What would happen? We don't need to understand it, we don't have to try to say this is exactly how everything needs to get fixed because it's beyond any one person's imagination, right? But it comes through many, many people entering into that like co-creative process, healing process, and I guess manifestation process, kind of working with all of this divine energy that's part of our reality, that something really beautiful could happen.
How would you say that you tune into that practically?
Yeah, like to start by connecting with my body. And I think that I know we are probably going to do like a somatic practice, and that I think is going to help to illustrate this. But I like to connect with the energy of the earth. I have different guides that I have connected with. One of the modalities that I've studied is shamanism, and I bring that into my work a lot as well, which is rooted in that we can connect with more knowing kind of universal energy, with guides, with spirit, with the earth, and we can receive guidance. So it is part of our inner wisdom, and it's part of this connection with others. And a lot of it is just sinking into the space of being in your body and trust, and like receiving a download, right? You start to receive knowings, receive downloads. Maybe it's visual, maybe it's a felt sense. And as a for instance, a lot of people have inner child wounds, right? And something that I do a lot in my practice with clients is there are times in which we sit with their inner child, right? And it's like something that's still inside of them. It's something that's still inside of us. Everything we've ever experienced is in our bodies, right? It's stored in our memories, our tissue. Our body has memory, not just our brain. And so we can evoke these like younger parts of ourselves, and we can sit with them and we can help them heal whatever it is that they didn't get to heal at that time. And sometimes they have a gift to give us or a message to give us, and the person just knows. They see it or they receive it. And it's a lot like that, that whether it's from some part within us, something deep within our subconscious or our psyche, or whether it's a spirit guide, or however you want to think about it. Some people think about this more in terms of science, and some people think about it more in terms of spirituality. But either way, it's the same result, right? That we can access this knowledge.
Yeah. And I think there's only one time that has ever happened to me. And I was kind of experiencing God, I guess I would say. And it's interesting that we're talking about kind of connecting to our bodies and God through nature, because that's very much how it was for me. But I was out in the middle of nowhere in Pennsylvania on this mountain. There's nobody around me probably no one else on the mountain. And the second that I kind of stepped onto the walking path that I was going to be on for the next few hours, I felt this overwhelming presence of, somehow I knew it was God. There wasn't anything that audibly told me that, but it was just the most overwhelming presence of love I've ever felt in my life. And I just like wept for 3 hours the whole time I was in the mountain. And it was the most powerful thing I've ever experienced in my life. And I would say I'm a really sensitive person, but I was not one of those people as a child who was one of my sisters. I would, I guess, describe as really sensitive and really spiritual. And I've become more that way as I've gotten older, but I'm not super emotional, and I'm not like, that's not a normal occurrence for me. And I remember, as I've kind of reflected back on that later, how it's interesting that the one thing that God wanted to show me was how much he loved me. And that's the only thing. There was no other message I got, no other feeling I experienced. And I feel like if we could just understand how loved and held we are, what a different place we would interact with the world from,
Yeah.
from feeling so worthy and so loved and so important. You can even see that in maybe children who have grown up in homes where maybe their parents were super affirming of them, and just kind of like the confidence that they have and carry themselves with is a tiny example of that. But
I love that story so much. And what I love about it is the experience of connection with something beyond us and something that's within us is so accessible.
mhm.
It doesn't, you don't necessarily have to deeply study some modality forever. There is the simplicity of going outside and just sitting in the sun and feeling the wind on your face and just being in touch with how much energy and joy and beauty is around you, and that it's part of you. And those kinds of feelings will drop in, like those kinds of knowings of I'm part of it all and I'm seen. like what you had. I think that's accessible to people.
Yeah.
They want to start just being open to receiving it.
Yeah. And I feel like a big part, like you've said many times, is you really have to make space for it. It's really easy to, when you're going on a walk, to have your phone or listening to a podcast or music, but I think that that is so accessible to us, but like anything, it's not going to come to us if we're distracted.
Mhm.
Can you lead us through a somatic practice
Absolutely, I'd
so
love
we
to.
can experience it?
Yeah, for sure. And I don't think I really need to say anything about it. I'll just, as I guide, I'll explain what feels right in the moment.
Okay. And
So,
this is just to give people kind of context. This is what you do with people when you're working with them.
yeah, this is going to help to give people a sense of what that work can be like.
Okay.
So, I'm just going to invite you and anyone who's listening to first just kind of notice you are sitting in a chair, or like maybe you're sitting on the floor, maybe you're standing, but just kind of noticing whatever's supporting your body right now. Noticing maybe it's like your sits bones of your hips are on your chair and your feet are on the floor. Just starting there. And also taking a moment to look around your environment a little bit. So just letting your eyes wander a little bit around the room and just seeing what that's like. That might be like, you might notice, oh, something kind of changes inside of me when I look around. For me, it kind of causes me to take a breath. Like there is this natural, deeper breath that just came through. And as it feels right, you can close your eyes. And as you close your eyes, just notice your breath. You don't have to change it, but just noticing how it is. And just noticing your body again, that support of the chair, your feet on the floor. And then I'm going to invite you to imagine that there is a white orb of light that's in your head. This is really just going to be kind of highlighting this first part of your nervous system, this part up at the top, which is your brain, just bathed in this white light. It's can be soothing. So just seeing that and noticing it. And then bringing that white light slowly down your spinal cord, soothing your nervous system as it moves down. And then at your chest, bringing that white light out into your heart space. And just noticing what that's like. We have all of these neurons around our heart. And actually, what some people call a heart brain, that gives a lot of signals to the brain. Our heart actually tells our brain what to think often. So it's just being bathed in this white light. And then bringing that same white light back to the spinal cord and back down the spine further, soothing that nervous system as it goes. And then coming out to the gut, to the belly, bathing that space in white light. Again, another brain of the body, all of these networks of neurons in the gut that give us that gut instinct. Just being bathed in that light. And then bringing that light back to the spinal cord and down further to the tailbone and to that root of our body, the root chakra. And from there, letting roots grow down from that base of the body, that base of the spine down into the earth, rooting down and out in all directions, just noticing that you can feel them down there, way below you in the earth. And taking some time to rest there in this connection. And just noticing what that's like. What happens in your body when you are so deeply rooted into the earth? And then drawing up nutrition, drawing up yellow light, whatever it is that you see that's nourishing coming into those roots and rising up in those roots up to the base of your spine and then up your body and coming to fill you up. And you might also just check in and see as you look down at those roots and at the earth below you, is there any kind of a message, anything that it's important for you to know at this time that would come from Mother Earth? And receiving that message, holding it close, and taking another moment to just be in this experience, just in your body, connected, held. And taking your time, when you're ready, you can just kind of bring back into your awareness the room that you're in. Maybe even before opening your eyes, just sensing out the chair, the floor, the walls, the space around you. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes and come back into the room.
Thank you. I feel so relaxed. That was
Mm.
lovely.
Yeah, you're welcome. Very welcome. Right before we hopped on our call, I took a moment to just sit and close my eyes. And this meditation just like happened inside of me right away. And I was like, oh yeah, I didn't think about sharing a practice during this. And for the listeners to know, when we hopped on the call, you were like, I was gonna see if you wanted to do that. And I was like, I was gonna see if you wanted to do it. And I guess I just want to put that out there because all over these years, the more and more that I have learned how to listen to my body, that is something that happens to me like all the time, 24/7. It's just close my eyes, drop in, and know things. And that's just like that's the possibility of what's there when you cultivate this, like that there's always wisdom and there's always medicine that's ready to come through.
Yeah. That's kind of what I wanted to tell you, kind of what I thought of
Hmm.
when you said at that point of the practice, is there anything that I can't remember the exact words you used, but any message that you need to hear? And I something I've really struggled with in the past year or two has been I've worked since I graduated from college as in the creative space, and I've had my own business for a few years, and I've worked as a photographer and a writer and a designer, just kind of doing a lot of different things in the space of creative marketing. But last year, kind of when I got hit really hard, it's interesting. It happened for me at 27 too, of just getting like slammed with debilitating illness. I think that survival kind of kills creativity, because if you think about creativity as something, I always think of it as like something that you're birthing that requires fertility. Even if you think about the land birthing food, or a tree birthing fruit, or an animal birthing a child, it requires kind of this sense of safety. And I've
Mm,
struggled so much in the past year to, like, it just feels like such hard work to kind of have any creative idea, whereas my entire career used to be that, and it used to be so easy and fun for me. And as I was thinking about that and just feeling my feet on the floor, which is really interesting, when we first started the practice, I was sitting cross-legged, and then my feet were moving everywhere, and then eventually I was just like, I need to just put my feet on the floor and relax.
mhm.
And the message that kind of came was that the creativity is still there. I just have to learn how to cultivate it and rest so that my body feels safe enough to be able to produce things again.
Yeah. I love that that came through for you, and just putting that word out there of safety, because
Yeah.
that is so important. Like, we need to feel enough safety in order to create, in order to put ourselves out there, in order to birth things into the world. And that's a big part of what healing is about, is like creating more safety in
Mhm.
us.
Even to facilitate physical healing, our body has to feel
Hmm.
safe.
Hmm. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. The
Yeah,
message that came through for me was, be joyful, you are divine.
I love that. That's beautiful.
I've been working on joy a lot lately.
You seem very joyful.
Well, I'm really trying to tap into it. So, just reminding myself how, even as we approached this interview, this call, I was just like, whatever parts of me may sometimes like get nervous. Like, I think as entrepreneurs, like, we do have to put ourselves out there. We have to connect with people. We have to be, tap into our confidence. And a lot of that comes from the body. And so sometimes we're facing nervousness. Often we're facing growth edges. And I've just been reminding myself lately, like, the things that I'm pursuing are things I want. And I just need to be joyful while I'm doing them. Like, I just need to be joyful while I'm doing this interview. And it has been joyful. So thank you for being part of that.
Yeah, and you can tell as you're speaking and as you're leading us through practice, you're so knowledgeable about what you do. And it's so powerful because it's something that you have discovered and come to from a place of your own desperation and eventual healing. And I just think that's so powerful because you're so wise, but that's not coming from a lot of, I mean, yes, you are intelligent, but it's also coming from knowledge from your body, from experiencing these things in your life.
Yeah.
And I think that's so powerful.
Yeah, and like, to put some perspective to that, like, I am a very smart and intelligent person. Like, I graduated first in my college class.
Wow.
I spent a lot of my younger years, I think, really and I was rewarded for my academic intelligence.
Hmm.
Big part of healing for me was honestly like having to keep setting my ego aside and be like, this isn't about that kind of knowledge.
Yeah.
Continuously being like, this is about me letting go of um, guarding myself through intellect and through needing to know, and surrendering that into like this other kind of wisdom and knowing that is honestly a lot more vulnerable.
Yeah.
So just kind of glad you brought that up, because
Yeah.
definitely has been a part of my journey, and I think still kind of continues to be at times. Like, old habits like come back up, like when we are dealing with any kinds of new challenges, it's common for old patterns to rise back up that used to make us feel safe.
Mhm. That's interesting you said that because that's been an important thing for me to realize recently too. I think I've always leaned on knowledge as making me feel very safe and in control from a very young age. And I'm doing something now, you'd be probably really interested in this, that's based on, it's kind of like a chronic illness healing system based on the limbic system
Mhm.
and neuroplasticity.
Yeah. Is it
It's
the dynamic neural
yes.
retraining system? I
Yeah.
I dabbled in that and studied that a little bit, like, several years ago.
Yeah, it's really interesting. But one of the things that she says a lot and that I kind of see in a lot of people when you watch the videos and the testimonials of people and their experiences is you kind of have to let go of your identity as being the expert
Mhm.
because a lot of head knowledge is wonderful, obviously, for engaging with the world, but sometimes I feel it can further separate me from what I truly need to know and
Right.
experience and feel emotionally.
Absolutely. I think that it is kind of a survival and protection mechanism from actually feeling, and that is when people have sometimes asked me if I could, like, be the most concise and be like, "What did I need to do in order to heal?" It was to stop suppressing my emotions and to feel all the unfelt emotions that I had suppressed my whole life,
Yeah,
you know? And being really intellectual is one of the ways in which we avoid doing that.
yeah. Yeah, I remember there was a social worker person one time when I was younger. I won't tell you the whole story, but I was in like a psychotherapy setting and I had never, this sounds terrible. I was like 23 at the time, but I never talked about my feelings to anyone. And she looked at me after I was like trying to tell her something, I don't remember. And she says, "You don't say you feel anything. You say, I think I feel."
Mhm.
And I thought that was so interesting because it's like you're filtering every single emotion you have through a lens of logic and intellect and deciding if it is valid enough to feel or express,
Right.
which
Absolutely.
is like
It's
a block.
right. Yeah, that's a really good point. It is
Yeah.
good to practice just saying, "I feel," and you might start with, like, sensations, whatever's accessible.
Mhm.
Feel warmth, or I feel tingling, or I feel heavy, or it might be I feel sadness, I feel hope, I feel gratitude, rather than I feel like this is what I need to do, or I feel
Mhm.
like yeah.
Can you share, kind of as a last question, something that gives you hope in your work, in the world,
Yeah,
whatever you wanna say?
yeah. Um, I think what gives me hope is that the embodiment movement and healing from, like, a embodied perspective, a mind body connected perspective, mind body spirit is really, like, becoming much more prominent and big. Like, it's becoming part of our culture, and that gives me a lot of hope. One of my teachers said something at a recent training. A lot of times, like I mentioned, we can do healing work by talking about the parts of ourselves, like, some part of me feels this and some part of me feels that, and she was saying how she's noticed that that is actually part of our language now. Like, in our modern culture, she hears just people talking on TV, or, like, people in, like, just regular life, that's how people talk now. I just think that healing is becoming part of our culture. I think a lot of people were born at this time because they were meant to go on a healing journey, because they were meant to be healers. So that gives me a lot of hope. I'm excited to see what happens. It feels like a really exciting time to be alive.
That's a good way to look at it.